Hi, friends, and welcome back to Beyond the Classroom. I'm your host, Lisa Harding. Today, we're talking about burnout, the kind that comes from constant pressure, emotional exhaustion, and feeling like your well-being is always last on the list, specifically burnout that comes from the workplace. I'm joined today by Ruby Brown Herring, a nationally recognized corporate well-being consultant and CEO of RBH Wellness Solutions. Ruby's here to share practical strategies teachers can use to protect their mental health, even when the workplace isn't getting any easier. If you're feeling overwhelmed or stretched too thin, this episode is for you. Let's dive in. I'm Lisa Harding, ex-EdTech CEO turned certified teacher career coach. It wasn't all that long ago that I was recruiting, interviewing, and hiring teachers for roles in corporate America. Teachers that ended up being some of my all-time best employees. Fast forward through my own career transition, where I left my role as CEO to become a stay-at-home mom, I now work with and empower teachers to transform their lives by turning their once distant career dreams into realities. In this podcast, I give you simple, actionable, step-by-step strategies to help you do the same. If you're a burnt-out teacher or simply need a change and you're looking to create a life you love, you're in the right place, friend. Let's get started. All right, everyone. So excited to welcome Ruby onto the show today. Hi, Ruby. Welcome.
Hi, Lisa. So thankful for being here with you today.
And I'm really excited to jump into this conversation. It's a very important conversation, not just for career transitioning teachers, but really teachers across the board. So hopefully this episode gets shared even with teacher friends of yours, if you're listening, that may not be changing careers. I think it's going to be a wonderful conversation. So Ruby has spent years and years, pretty much her whole career, dedicated for mental health, building healthier workplaces. And we're on today to talk a little bit about that. So Ruby, maybe just start, how did you get into this field and what exactly do you do?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I love kind of talking about my journey. So I'll give folks the 30,000 foot version. So I have worked in helping professions all of my life. Spent 10 years in higher education as a career counselor. And so part of me will forever be tied to education. But then moved into continuing education, so adult learners. And then shifted where had this point in my life where I was like, I want to be a trainer, and had this opportunity happen here in the state where I live in North Carolina that allowed me to be able to do that. And really what it also allowed me to be able to do is connect back with school systems, providing mental health first aid training for school staff. Then what we all dread of hearing and to hearing as employees is, we've lost our funding and your job ends here. All right. And so had that period of, as you mentioned transitioning, where I was like, okay, I'm looking for a job because I have to, not because I want to, and the stresses that went with that. Mm-hmm. And it led me to a client that said, hey, we know about mental health first aid. And they actually worked with pre-K programs. It was a Head Start program that crossed 7 states. And they said, we want you to help us integrate mental health first aid into our employee well-being initiative, because our education staff in my Head Start program, they're stressed, and this was pre-pandemic. And so learned about well-being, employee well-being, and it allowed me to bring together my loves of taking care of myself, but also from that mental health perspective and being a mental health advocate and awareness professional. And so that's kind of how I got into this work of employee well-being, and have had the opportunity to, like I said, bring those two areas of my life together and just make what I feel is some impactful change in corporate space, but also in government agencies and school systems alike.
Oh, I love that. I'm glad we got to kind of dive into your story, because hearing you went through your own transition. Mm-hmm. Like you said, there is a difference between having to get a
Yeah.
job and wanting to get a job, and how you've kind of taken your previous skills and built this whole new life and career for yourself, which
Yeah.
is motivating just in and of itself, because everyone in the audience is hoping to do that same thing. So thank you for sharing that. And as you know, like a majority of teachers are, especially right now, are facing a lot of burnout
Mhm.
in the workplace. They might feel underappreciated. Some feel just very overwhelmed with the workload. A lot of teachers will describe it just like emotionally
Yeah.
drained. They get home, they have nothing left to give. We talk about the Sunday scaries and all of that. And
Mhm.
you've worked kind of like at the high level, looking at trends and reasons for burnout and employee unwell being so that you can correct it. Are there any like the main things that you see cause this in employees from like an organizational perspective? Like what's actually causing this?
Yeah, that's such a good question. What I've noticed, a couple of things, I think, particularly with teachers that I've talked to over the last couple of years, we know that teachers do that work because it's their heart work, right? And so, having worked in a helping profession myself, it's like I'm giving 150% of myself, and everything revolves around wanting my students to be seen and be taken care of, and so that they can be grow up to be wonderful human beings. And oftentimes what I've heard from teachers and other school administrators, and I've just seen in some of the research, is we do that to our own detriment, right? And it's because I put my needs on the back burner because I want to make sure that my students' needs are met. And so I think that it's that piece. I think it's also, as society and the workplace has changed, teachers are now doing more and more and more with so much less.
Yeah.
Because we hear all the time where teachers are funding their classrooms. All of these, they're providing the snack drawers for students that may not have food. They're providing clothing for students that may, all of those things, and so they're giving 150% of themselves and not taking care of themselves in the process. And when I say not taking care of themselves, I mean something. Oftentimes we hear people talk about taking care of ourselves. It's like, oh, we have to take a vacation. No, it is simply taking 10 minutes to just sit in silence, right? Or having that moment when you pull up in the parking lot before you walk into the school building, practice some deep breathing, and not even giving themselves that time. But then when they go home, family life takes over, and not being able to manage through some of that. So I think it's truly their hard work that leads to some of that burnout, but also not having the tools to navigate those challenges in a way that helps them take care of themselves. And that's
Yeah.
the piece that I love within the work that I do, is giving them those tools that school doesn't teach them.
Yeah, they're not taught how to address those things. Kind of, we talk here like no one's taught how to make a career transition. No one's taught how to do
Right.
that. And I'm by no means an expert at mental health, but with part of what I do coaching careers, like the conversation comes up. And one thing that I hear a lot, Ruby, is like there's a struggle with teachers setting boundaries.
Mm,
Um, and if my audience could see you, she is shaking her head in agreement. So could you speak on that a little bit? Because I see it, but I can't address it like professionally. Like, what does that make you
yeah.
think and
Oh my
say?
goodness. Boundaries are critical in our well-being. And as human beings, particularly, and I know I'm making a little bit of a generalization here, so I'm apologize for that. As women, because we do see a lot of women in the education field, we don't do a good job at setting boundaries, and that also impacts our well-being. There's a training that I do where I talk about well-being, and boundaries is part of that, and I speak to it from the perspective of, in a couple of places, but there's one area particularly around self-care, and I say to folks, setting a boundary is self-care. Saying no is self-care. But the challenge that we often feel, especially those that are doing hard work, like folks that are educators, is saying no without guilt, right? And so
Yeah.
setting those boundaries without that guilt. And so oftentimes just thinking about, okay, how can I do this? And maybe it's not no forever. It could be, no, not right now. It could be, no, I don't have the capacity, but here are some thoughts that might help you get started. And so reframing it in terms of what we're being asked to do, and knowing that even by setting those boundaries, we're still being great in our roles, right? We're challenging other folks to be resourceful in their own right without taking all of the information and energy from within us.
And one thing, when I was an employee in corporate America, one thing I would do, and it doesn't like translate into education, but what I would do if my manager asked me to do something, and you don't want to say no to your manager, but I would frame it as, I'm happy to do that, but can you help me reprioritize the other tasks on my list? And you tell me either what you want to be delayed or what you maybe don't want me to do. But teachers, like, they don't have that same kind of relationship or conversation in schools. And it's anytime they're asked for something, it's like on top of, on top of, on top of. And
No,
I mean, I guess they could reframe it that way too. And their principal might be like, might jar them enough to be like, oh, you know what? Like, I didn't realize your plate's so full. I'll ask someone else.
That's such a good point. And I think there's two things you touched on there. It's really about the relationship they have with their principal, right? And so really thinking about what that looks like. I'll give you an example that connects beautifully to what you just said, Lisa. I worked on a project with our State Department of Public Instruction here in North Carolina that was around teacher well-being. And one of the sessions that we had done, and I forget which one this example came up in, but one of the participants was a school teacher in a district where they had I don't remember what grade level, but the other teacher left. And her principal came to her and was like, okay, then you're the person, you're going to take over. I'm just going to, let's say, Lisa's role. And because of the relationship that she had with her principal, and it takes time to build that. And I think sometimes teachers need to be empowered to advocate for themselves and build that relationship so they can do what this young lady did. And she said, I can't take on all of Lisa's role, but this is what I can do in her responsibilities. Now, who else can help? Help with this. And so basically they end up parsing out the responsibilities of that one person. So it all didn't land on her plate. And the principal's like, oh, that's a good idea. Never thought about it, because again, they are immediately going to, I got to solve this, fill this gap. And it's typically, I'm going to redistribute. But redistributing the work doesn't always mean it has to go to one person. And so, but because of the relationship she had with that principal, she felt empowered and comfortable and safe enough to say that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you bring up like the relationship with the principal. And I do think that matters so much. Even just thinking about corporate America and how I interact with employees, like in corporate America, like managers go through training on like how to be a good manager, like how to have relationships with your employees. And I think sometimes that's not necessarily something that all school administrators go through as well. And I see a trend of, like, if a teacher has a great relationship with their administrator, I feel like it's a very different vibe, if you will, than the teachers I talk to that don't have that relationship. So it seems like that's also one of those critically important things that might be impacting like overall burnout and mental health in the environment.
Yeah, no, it is. It's the relationship and the trust, because at the end of the day, it really comes down to a power dynamic, right? It's like, I'm a teacher, you're the principal. I need my job. And so we may not feel as empowered, but I think one of the things that I try to do in the work that I do with, whether it's in corporate or in schools, is empowering people. Now, it's not saying, yeah, no, I'm not doing that. It's okay. How can you feel empowered to say what you can do, and then help them brainstorm ways to fill the other needs that are on the table. But relationship is key, and having the psychological safety, which is one of those key terms that we hear everywhere now, but it really comes down to the trust that we feel, but also the emotional intelligence that we have as individuals. How am I aware of myself and what I need? How am I able to communicate that to my principal and to my colleagues even?
Yeah. I think another slippery slope for teachers, and I think maybe this falls under boundaries, but a different aspect of
Okay.
boundaries is like sometimes the workday never ends for
Mm.
teachers because they're getting emails from
Mhm.
from parents. They're having to grade papers, and not every career is like that. And I feel like that's a different way to look at it. It's still a boundary conversation, it seems like.
Yeah.
But do you have any insight into that?
Yeah. Yeah, it's for me it's one of the things I think is helpful is coming up with a plan and a routine, right? And so if you have to take papers home to grade at night, set aside whether it's 30 minutes or an hour. This is my time to do that. And if you have to set a timer, because I'm that person, because if I once I go down the rabbit hole, I'm there. And so I've had to set timers to remind me, okay, you're gonna do this task for this amount of time. And then when the timer goes off, I'm going back to mama, I'm going back to Ruby, and I'm just gonna chill in my favorite chair and watch Netflix. And so I think that's the key is, but again, we not saying don't allow that hard work to take us down the rabbit hole, but just manage how deep down the rabbit hole it gets, if that makes sense. And so that's where I think that blocking out the time, having the timer, and say, okay, when this task is, and I get as far as I get. If I get all the papers graded, wonderful. If I only get three-fourths of them, that's fine. Then where can I finish the rest of them? Maybe it's in the morning when I'm doing my morning coffee before I start my day. And I think that's the thing. Having those blocks of time and those routines are going to be helpful. I'm a planner and I like to map my stuff out on paper. And so even just looking at, how can I develop that routine so that I can find maintain that balance with boundaries as it relates to work and my life.
I love all this, and I love all the practical tips. I'm writing some of these down as we go so I can recap them for the audience. I love the set a timer thing.
Yeah.
Hey teachers, quick break in the podcast because I have something truly special for you. The Teacher Career Transition Summit is a free virtual event packed with expert advice, real success stories, and step-by-step guidance to help you explore new careers and land a job you love. It's happening on Saturday, June 14th. So if you're hearing this before then, go grab your free ticket. And if it's already passed, no worries. You can access the full replays or join a waitlist for the next one. Head on over to our website, teachercareertransitionacademy.com/summit to check out what's available now. And back to the podcast. Another thing a teacher told me once that she did that kind of, I'm not going to say changed her life, but made it a little bit easier is she had certain windows where the parents in her classroom knew that she replies to emails I forget what hers was, but maybe 7:30 a.m. to 8. And then I also reply from 4 to 4:30. If you don't hear, I'll get back to you in the next window. And had an auto responder so parents knew this is when I answer emails, and they started respecting it more. And so I thought that was maybe a nice tip to share too in this conversation.
No, I love that because you're right. People blur the lines when they don't know where the lines are, right?
Yeah, good point.
They muddy them. And so she's clear in saying, okay, this is the time. And if I don't respond, I love that idea. And it's practical. And it becomes muscle memory with parents because she's got that auto reminder. I do something similar in my own email. So for instance, because I am an entrepreneur, my work schedule kind of flows. I can do stuff at 10 o'clock at night if I want to. And so I have even started in my email signature, I have a message that's at the bottom that says, and I'm paraphrasing it, but essentially, my work hours don't constitute your work hours. So what I'm saying to folks is, even if you get an email from me at 10 o'clock at night and you're looking at your email, which I hope you're not, unless that's the time that works for you, don't feel like you have to respond in that moment. My out of office, I usually take Fridays as my self-care day where I try not to have client meetings unless it's hard work that I want to be attached to, or it's folks that I can't get on my schedule. And so I have an out of office message that goes up Thursday afternoon that says, we made it to Friday. We made it another week, I think, or something like that. I'm out for self-care. I'll respond when I return to the office on this date. And then I even shifted it from including that date and just saying, I'll respond when I return to the office or at my earliest convenience. Because sometimes when I come back on that, let's say if I'm out this week, when I come back to the office on Monday, folks are like, I'm looking for a response because you're out of office said. But I could be in meetings half of that day or doing a training and I'm not able. And so I've learned, I was like, let me just change it to at my earliest convenience. But again, letting people know what those boundaries are and being okay speaking that. So I love that she felt empowered to use those techniques with her families. I just encourage folks to think about what works for you. The examples that we've shared work for us and the individuals that we talked about, but really be intentional in thinking about what works for you and trying it out.
I love that. And you earlier shared a couple of like strategies for in the moment, like I'm about to lose it. Like you said, find 10 minutes or maybe it's 5 and just sit in silence, the deep breathing. Are there any other like strategies or tactics that we should be considering to just help us like get off the ledge if we need that?
Yeah. Yeah. I think one of the things that I'm all about working smarter, not harder, right? And so for teachers, it might be, okay, what do you suggest to students to help them self-regulate? Is there something that you might can pull from that toolbox, right? Because it might be something that you can adapt and apply. Another example that I've shared with school staff, like if you're on cafeteria duty, while you're walking from your classroom to the cafeteria, focus on some deep breathing, true deep breathing in that moment, or imagine yourself being in your ideal vacation spot. And so you're utilizing that time. So instead of just walking to the cafeteria, oh my goodness, I hate cafeteria duty. Focus on your, and it's in those moments. So even let's say it's a 2-minute walk to the cafeteria. And if you're doing that deep breathing exercise, you're resetting that parasympathetic nervous system that's going to start to release some of the stresses that you've been building up throughout the day. And so making use of, if you're at the copier and having to make copies, can you focus on some deep breathing? Can you do some stretches? And so it's maximizing it and building it into your routine throughout the day is what I have found is most helpful.
That sounds much more helpful than going out to the car and crying at the steering wheel. So appreciate the tip.
But to your point, oh, that's such a good example. Oh my goodness. But there may be those days where you have to do that, right?
Okay,
and
yeah.
So taking that time to release that emotion, because oftentimes when we have that negative forward-facing emotion like crying or sadness, it's like, oh, let me push it down and ignore it. And it starts to bubble up in other places. We see it showing up in other places at work or at home. And so sometimes you just need a good cleansing cry. Go do that and sit with that emotion for a second, allow myself to process it, and then say, okay, I've released it. I don't want to get stuck here. Now what can I do to go back in and move forward with my day? And so that's the thing. We don't get stuck in those hard, scary emotions. We acknowledge them and say, okay, what is this telling me? Do I need to change something within myself? Is this something that I can even change? Because it may be out of my circle of control. And if so, can I change it? Do I not change it and acknowledge that I can't change it? But what can I do to move forward?
Love that. I love that. Speaking of moving forward, segue, I want to kind of change the topic just a little bit as we end, kind of wrap things up. We talked about, the cultures at school, what's leading to it, some techniques to kind of get through it. But so teachers in my audience are leaving and going into new careers into corporate America. And, we think, oh, the grass is greener, which isn't always true. Most of the times it is because it is very difficult in teaching, but you could get into a different type of pasture. But so you're a teacher, you're trying to find a new home, a new career. You want to make sure you're not getting into another toxic work environment. Are there things that we could be looking for in the interview process or questions we could be asking to try to find out, what's the corporate life like at this organization? Or what kind of things should we be listening to cue into to be like, oh yeah, these people care about mental health at their company?
Yeah, it's such a great question. I think a couple of things on the front end, do some research and looking at their website and looking at what their values are and really kind of reading through that and being familiar with that so that as you're in the interview, you can think about, okay, what are they, how how are they responding to questions in ways that connect back to those core values that I noticed on their website. I think that's one thing that we can do. The other thing that I encourage folks to think about is doing that self-reflection and being aware, okay, what are the things that are important to me? What is my passion? What is my purpose? What are those words? What are those phrases that for me strike a nerve? And I don't like to use the word trigger, but evoke emotion, right? Where it's like, ooh, I don't like that. Sounds challenging. That sounds like something I'm not comfortable. So doing that self-awareness piece for yourself about what those words and phrases are that evoke emotions for you and follow that. And so as you're hearing those, so I don't have a list of like key words necessarily, but it's for me, it's like, how are they responding to questions that I may be asking? Or what are the questions that they're asking and how they're connecting to those core values that they say they identify with? And if they don't align, when you're asking your questions, ask questions that kind of call them out in a professional way. Or maybe it's getting clarity as opposed to calling out. And then asking them, for example, one of my favorite questions, and as a career counselor, even though I've been out of that field 20 years, I still say to folks, my own daughters who are in the workplace, ask them, what is a day in the life of XYZ employee like? And just and pay attention to nonverbals after you ask that question. How are they shifting in their seats, or do you notice they're kind of like, ooh, taken aback by that? Because you can learn from that too, as well. And so think, how are their nonverbals and their verbal responses aligning with who you are as an individual and with what they're saying on their website and all the information they've shared with you about who they are, as well.
Yeah, I love that. And it's kind of like reading between the lines a little bit, and, and is what they're saying consistent throughout the whole interview process? And is it consistent like person to person too?
Person to person. Yeah. From email communication on the front end, in the middle, on the back end. And, don't be, because I think what I've seen with some folks that are leaving the field, particularly going into corporate spaces, are like, oh, it's going to be great. I'm like, yeah, maybe not. So what I would caution folks that are looking at transitioning to do is try not to be in such a hurry to leave education because it's so hard and scary, to the point where you are really putting aside your own values, right? Because things are so bad, I just want out. And the money is good and it gets me out. Really make sure that they're consistent with your own values, because that's going to be the key thing at the end of the day. Because if they're not, then you're going to end up in a very similar situation where you're like, okay, I don't like this either, I'm going to leave.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And sometimes it goes down to bringing it full circle, what you said at the beginning. Sometimes you need to get a job, and sometimes you want and change. And a lot of teachers, I think, are, they're still teaching. So they still have that, which is great. It gives them a little bit of cushion to make sure that the next fit is going to be good. So I love that advice. So as we wrap up, is there any final advice or words of wisdom or encouragement that you would love to give our burnt out teachers?
Yeah. The work that you do is so critically important. And oftentimes when I'm talking to educators and I'm asking, what do you need to make your job better? The response always goes back to their students. And what I would just encourage each of you to do is to really focus on you, because you can't give to your students if you're not taking care of yourself. You're so worth it. And feel empowered to advocate for yourself and to set those boundaries without feeling guilty, so that you can walk in your purpose and your passion.
I love that. And to paraphrase, you cannot pour from an empty cup.
That's it.
And I know we have a mix of teachers and administrators that are on the podcast. If you're an administrator or a teacher who leads PD at your school and you're thinking, hey, I think our school maybe needs some help with this, I'm going to make sure I put Ruby's website link in the show notes if you want to connect with her. I know she has a variety of services that she offers. And Ruby, if it's okay, I'll drop your LinkedIn as well.
Yeah, that would be great. I love to have conversations with folks if I can support in any way, but even just to brainstorm. Because here's the thing I think it's important that administrators remember is it is possible to provide support to your staff in terms of well-being in ways that are manageable and don't cost tons of money. So yeah, I'm happy to be part of that conversation if they need me.
I love that. And you can tell that you understand the school system because you know money is always tight, and that's always one of the
That's
number
it.
one concerns with
Yeah.
any new implementation of
Yeah.
anything. So
Yeah.
I love that. And thank you so much, Ruby. What a great conversation.
Thank you, Lisa.
Well, friends, I hope today's conversation with Ruby gave you not just insight, but permission. Permission to prioritize your well-being, set boundaries, and recognize that burnout isn't a personal failure. It's a sign that something needs to change. If you're in a tough season right now, please remember you are not alone and you are not stuck. For more support on your career journey, whether you're staying in the classroom or exploring what's next, be sure to check out the resources and the Teacher Career Transition Academy. And as always, if this episode spoke to you, I'd be so grateful if you'd leave a review, share it with a friend, or tag us on social media to continue the conversation. Remember, friends, the journey is just the beginning. Embrace the adventure.